Out of the gates and ready to go. Hot Mic with Hutton and Withrow underway on this 2024 edition, the first. Glad you're with us. Streaming live on YouTube, OutKick.com as well. Exclusively on OutKick.com starting tomorrow, January 3rd. We kick off the shows of the year with a big recap of all things football. John McClain will join us later this hour. Coming up in hour number 2, Jim Nagy of the Reese's Senior Bowl. He'll join us with the very latest on the scouting aspect of what we've seen from the bowl weekend. We say hello to Kelly Stewart, who is in for Chad Withrow for the final day as he begins his Lewis and Clark expedition back to Nashville from Nebraska. And Kelly, nice enough to join us from her home location in Florida. Happy New Year to you, Kelly. Hope it was great.
Happy New Year, Hutton. It was a blast. I was in bed by 12:15, as we should be. At this point in time in our lives, anyway.
Was it a moneymaker weekend for you overall?
Outside of the Colts, which was, I wish everybody on X a Happy New Year, except for them. Cannot believe not only did they settle for the field goal there, but then they played prevent defense.
Yeah.
And let the Raiders backdoor that game. I got a push. Unfortunately, a lot of people I know lost. It was a painful push. Usually you're like, a push is a win. No. That was a painful push. And I thought, man, if this is any indication of how this week's going to go, I'm in for a world of hurt. But that was the only loss. I will take it with a smile and maybe even wish the Colts a Happy New Year.
Well, everyone's smiling after the college football playoff matchups that we received. 2 years in a row now, we've had some epic matchups, and they have delivered on the field in the semis. Starting with Michigan winning over Alabama in a solid back-and-forth game. Not the solid play top to bottom, per se. I mean, it was a sloppy game. Milroe turning the football over. He sacked, 6-7 times in this matchup. Meanwhile, J.J. McCarthy, the 4th and 2 play that really flipped everything, all the momentum currently with Bama, and then it goes all the way to Michigan from that point. A total of, 55 yards or something offensively when that happened, Kelly. And in a season where Michigan, the staff, the program, the administration and the athletic department, the university itself pushed all the chips into the middle of the table, backing Harbaugh and everything that has gone on from the recruiting violations and investigation to the Connor Stallions scandal and sign-stealing saga. They win. They're headed to the national championship, and they win in overtime. Blake Corum takes over. And the final play call on 4th down for Alabama, stuffed on the quarterback keeper for Milroe, followed by another great game between Washington and Texas that came down to the wire as well on the final play. I'm automatically thinking of the 12-team playoff, and it's because of the last 2 years and how the teams that have matched up have been great on the field from a viewership standpoint. We're not averaging 21-point blowouts in these matchups any longer, and I doubt we see that moving forward.
And it was wonderful. I mentioned I went to bed at about 12:15 on New Year's Eve. Well, I didn't go to bed until about 1 o'clock last night because I was so jacked up. Yeah. Oh, it was great. It was a wonderful, what a treat. After kind of some, we'll call them mediocre bowl games, there was a couple of fun ones in there, but after some real unfortunate ones, right? We had opt-outs. We had guys declare for the NFL. There was a lot of teams that cared and a lot of teams that didn't. The college football playoff was a real treat. I'll say that much. It wasn't just because I went 2-0, but it was a really fun game to watch. Michigan had me, sweating late down the stretch there after that muffed punt. In that game, it was not very much fun, and then gets down there. I thought they left too much time left on the clock for Alabama. Oh, man, it was just a real sweat. And then, hey, if you had the over, you were very thankful for overtime. As far as the Texas-Washington game goes, it was everything I wanted and more in that one. Washington's been disrespected all year long. We had been told that, Alabama and Michigan, the Rose Bowl, is going to be the real game we want to look forward to, and just kind of acted like this other, Sugar Bowl was second fiddle, but I thought both games were absolutely excellent. And like I said, I stayed up later because my adrenaline was pumping so hard in that second game. Boy, was that some interesting play calling down the stretch from Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah, man, and same for what we saw against Bama, right? Or for Bama in the overtime. But the interesting play calling, but in the second game, Kelly, with Texas, I'm midway through the second half. This is a foregone conclusion. We're going to have Michigan and Washington matching up. And then all of a sudden, Texas has the football, and quickly they get down the field, big 40-yard play. They get inside the red zone, and they're looking at scoring. I thought it was over. As soon as they had, 30 seconds left, clock was stopped. I'm thinking this is where Texas scores, and they move on to the national title. I know you had Washington. The momentum was with Texas, and great defense on the final play. And the play calling by Sarkisian, you're right, in this series, the running back that gets out on the quick screen, gets out of bounds. I didn't understand that call. But they went to who they needed to go to in the final moments, who has been clutch. And it's the defense for Washington that comes up big and sends the Huskies to the title. And it will be no matter who wins the title, we're looking at a championship for a team for the first time in 18 years. And that was counting Texas, because when Bama fell, we're going to see something fresh in college football. And we're going to see something fresh in college football next year with all of the conference realignment. So many different storylines played out. And Washington moves on again. Their 10th straight game that has been decided by 10 points or less. They come through. They're just like TCU, but offensively, I mean, if they are USC and they're not Washington, I think we're looking at this offense way differently, just from the perspective of where we would put them and just the efficient category. They haven't been always great. They've been in some weather games that affect all that. But Michael Penix Jr. was exceptional. I mean, throwing the darts into coverage, he looked great. And if he shows up in that same manner against Michigan, Washington can be your national champion.
Well, there's something to being 23 years old, Michael Penix Jr. You know, a lot of people overlooked him, overlooked Washington. They were double-digit underdogs to an Oregon team that had already beaten the Pac-12 championship. Then they were 4.5-point underdogs, and it got steamed pretty low yesterday. I think I even saw 3 start to pop up on the odds screen. Everybody loved the over, and rightfully so. That's when we got to see all the fireworks. But I think they're being disrespected here just a little bit again. This one opened 3.5, now 4.5 within less than 12 hours.
And what does that tell you? That the public's going to jump on Washington, or the public's going to ride with Michigan because all they've done is show up and win as well? Because, again, I don't want to doubt Washington, but I also feel like the efficient quarterback, the veteran quarterback, I'm looking more at McCarthy for whatever reason. That's the perception, the manager, and he's more than that. But Penix Jr. is clutch, and he shows it yet again.
Yeah, I would have to agree. JJ is more of the game manager. He's a great leader for that Michigan team. Michael Penix Jr. is just an absolute stud. I mean, the guy is a gamer. He is an athlete. He made plays yesterday that, granted, being on the East Coast, you don't get to watch a lot of Pac-12 football sometimes as a recreational fan, right? But if you got money on it, you're willing to stay up late. So I only got to catch a couple of those Washington games, but I thought he has looked better than I've seen him look all year as far as accuracy goes, as far as reading the defense goes. But Hutton, I think you nailed it earlier when you said that the Washington defense really stepped up. Pac-12, well, they're not necessarily always known for those defensive plays. But boy, did they show up big when they needed to yesterday. And I think that might surprise a few people as far as the betting market goes. I can tell you this right now. It's not public money betting next Monday's game this early on. So to see early Michigan money was a little surprising to me. But I will say this. When I spoke to a prominent bookmaker in Las Vegas and I asked him, I said, hey, what are we doing? Why are we disrespecting Washington so bad? And that was in the Pac-12 championship game. And he broke down. He said, they're going to be 6-point underdogs to Michigan, and to Alabama. They'd be 6-point underdogs to Michigan. Well, then all of a sudden they go out there, they beat Texas. The line opens up 3.5. Maybe some people far smarter than me thought that was a little too short.
Michigan's used to being in the college football playoff. They're used to the moment. They haven't been able to break down the door. They're used to scrutiny. They're used to the pressure. They're used to those that are naysayers. Who say you shouldn't be here because of this or that. And quite frankly, it wasn't even brought up all that much in the broadcast last night about what the season has been with the 6 games combined for the suspension for Jim Harbaugh. But those players, and I've said this in the past, Kelly, I don't know how I will view the players when it's all said and done versus the coaching staff and specifically Harbaugh. And it's because through it all, they've just shown up and done exactly what they said and expected they were going to do. And that's just win, execute, play sound football. And while there have been a couple of close games for them, few and far between based on their schedule, but also based on how good they are. And then there's the Washington Huskies, who will be here. They haven't, while they have been at the top of the college football playoff rankings, I mean, they've been right there. They're in. They win the game when the pressure was on them to beat Texas. This is where I think the perception of both teams now flips, because Michigan had to prove that they could go through Penn State. They did it against Ohio State. But they've done that from the physicality aspect of what everyone questioned once they got to the college football playoff. Once they faced the opponents that kept them from winning the national championship or advancing. Now I'm thinking, can Washington do that in the trenches with Michigan? Is that what this is about? Can Washington hold up with Michigan, who just did that against Bama?
I'd like to think so. Now, here's the couple caveats that we have to think about. Washington having never been there before.
Right.
Versus Michigan, who has kind of gotten embarrassed a few times there, right?
Yep.
Whether albeit Georgia or TCU or any of the other 0-7, now 1-7 Jim Harbaugh bowl games or college football playoff games. So did they get that monkey off their back, right? Sometimes that feels really good to get that perception off your back. And I think Washington did it versus Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, just downright disrespected. Now they go and they beat Texas, albeit I was a Texas naysayer most of the season. And I made a joke with my Texas buddy last night. I said, well, if Colin Klein, K-State's offensive coordinator, didn't go for it on 4th down and overtime and just kick the field goal, we may not have even had to put you through this. And he didn't write me back. But that's only because Texas is so good, right? They have the best athletes, especially in the Midwest. Now they're going to go to the SEC. I think Washington proved a little something yesterday that they could beat some of the top athletes in America. Michigan, on the other hand, they kind of got, I don't want to say it was nerves, right? I've had a lot of people say, well, Kelly, they're kids, they're nervous. I don't care what you're doing. You are in a college football playoff. When you wave your hand and you say fair catch and it's over your head, you either let it go in the end zone or you let it bounce. If you have to hesitate like he did, that almost cost them the game. They've got to get some of those jitters and they've got to get rid of them quickly, because it almost like had that play not to lose mentality there for a minute, right after they scored that touchdown to tie it up. And that concerns me about Michigan, because they've been through a lot this year, whether it's the Connor Stallions drama, whether it's Harbaugh not being on the field. They've worked through a lot. I think Monday's game is going to be really exciting. I have not made a wager yet, but there's a lot to really start to unpack.
How about the 4th and 2 call, though, just to flip that? And Jack Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh's father, was asked about what he would have done. He said, punt it. I punt it. That was post-game. The 4th and 2 call, from where Michigan was versus how that game ended up, that is massive. I don't know if I've seen a bigger momentum shift and production shift after that play versus prior to that call.
That's probably a really good point. And as a gambler, I always, of course, want teams in that situation not to punt. I do another podcast. We joke that kicking is for losers, whether that's a surrender punt, like I think that would have been, and or kicking and settling for field goals. So it's kind of a hypocritical thing for me to say sometimes, but it depends on where my allegiances lie. I absolutely think that was one of those moments. Have you ever seen South Park, Randy Marsh with the wheelbarrow?
Oh, yeah.
That was Jim Harbaugh. You know what? He just wheeled him right out there and said, we're going for it on 4th and 2. His dad's absolutely right. The numbers guys probably said to punt it. Yeah. As a Michigan backer, very happy they didn't do so. That is one of those step on your throats, show them what you got kind of plays. And I think that says a lot to what type of coach Harbaugh is.
Randy Marsh, the balls in the wheelbarrow.
I wasn't sure if I was allowed to say it out loud, but hey, that's the meme that came to mind.
Michigan had 53 yards on 20 plays prior to the 4th and 2. The next 7 gained 67 and 25. I mean, so the mentality works there, and it goes up. We also saw the difference in quarterback play. McCarthy compared to Milroe. Milroe has been a steady contributor, and he has steadily improved week to week after he was benched. And the mentality that he had, where he's still going to show up and be the leader on the sideline in that game, turned into be the leader of the Crimson Tide offense. He tried to execute the play that was called in overtime. And Tim Hasselbeck did a good job of trying to show last night why it was a play that should have worked, where he walks into the end zone. But fourth down, getting that ball on the 3, Saban says it was a 2-point play that would have been their go-to play if they had to go for 2 at any point in the game. Very confident in it. And this is an offense that started out the season, Kelly, where Bama said they wanted to be more of bully ball. They wanted to get back to the line of scrimmage play. And in that moment, the right side of the Bama offensive line is pushed back, pushed into Milroe. And if that doesn't happen, he's going off the hip of the guard who's pulling, and he probably goes in for the score, and we have the tie game. Instead, Michigan, they have the moment. They get the stop. And to me, that's also a mental hurdle. That's another 4th and 2 type moment for them, because they could still go on and win if Bama scores there. But the fact they won the line of scrimmage on that play, that carries over. And here they are in the national championship game. And after all the turmoil, after all the talk, it all is just kind of evaporated away, at least for another game. And then when or if Michigan wins, all of the controversy comes back to the forefront, and the NCAA allowed all this to go on.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. But I'd like to backtrack just a little bit, talk about Jalen Milroe. Last week on the show, when I was in studio, you brought up Bill O'Brien's comments and Jalen Milroe, what he had to say. And he's like, there was a lot of tweets basically saying, oh, Bill O'Brien was right. And I'm going, wait, we're not blaming this play blowing up like this solely on Jalen Milroe. First of all, the snap was very low, and it hasn't been talked about enough. And again, if he waltzed right into the end zone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I do feel bad for Jalen Milroe there, because I do think he's being unfairly pinned for that. I don't think it was a bad play call. I just think it was poorly executed.
Yeah, and the play before it was not great either. So Milroe rushed 21 times for 63 yards, but his passing efficiency, 16 of 23 for just 116. Quarterback rating was low. You got the turnover as well. McCarthy, 17 of 27, 3 touchdowns. There's a big difference in just looking at that on paper and the quarterback efficiency and the experience level too in the moment. McCarthy's one of the more under discussed quarterbacks, because I think they're viewed, and rightfully so, they've got Corum and Edwards and others to run the football. That offense is based through the run, but it's based through the leadership of McCarthy.
I think, here's my caveat. On paper, as you say it, I just pulled it up. You're right. It looks like a massacre. But watching the game, I didn't think Jalen Milroe played poorly. I didn't think J.J. McCarthy played well, right? They both
It was a sloppy game.
It was, right? But as you broke that down to me on paper, I'm going, wow, maybe Jalen Milroe just really hurt, maybe his future as a quarterback here. That is difficult to hear from a just X's and O's perspective on the stat sheet, right? I always tell people, you got to actually pass the eye test for me. And neither one of those guys necessarily did. It was just that last series in overtime where I thought maybe Tommy Rees should hold some of that blame. And of course, Nick Saban, as well as Jalen Milroe.
And then there's the team that did not get into the playoff. Everyone is immediately going to think I'm discussing Florida State. I'm not. I'm talking about Georgia. Florida State it was massacred against Georgia, who just put a beat down on the Seminoles in the Orange Bowl. And while Florida State has checked out as soon as they knew they were not in the playoff. We saw Norvell, who came out, first of last week, or maybe the weekend prior, who said, I'm still trying to get the guys while we're practicing. My players, I'm trying to get them out of the mindset of the downfall and, the depressed feeling that we have that we're not in as among the 4. We're not playing against one of these teams right now as the unbeaten champ in the ACC. And then all the opt-outs and injuries and the players who were not there. This was as lopsided going into the game as the final score shows us. But it also shows us that if we're just talking best teams, one of the 4 best teams, while the games yesterday, we saw 2 great ones, and I don't argue against any of those teams and what they produced and how they went into the college football playoff and what we saw. Georgia's better than I'm looking at the scores and the way that the Georgia Bulldogs played. I don't know how you watch Georgia play and say they're not one of the 4 best teams going in. Florida State wasn't. I still believe, based on what they did, they deserve to be in, but thank God they weren't. It wouldn't have been this team that shows up, but the opt-outs and the injuries and just the talent level compared to what we saw is vastly different. It's not with the Georgia Bulldogs. And instead of going for a three-peat or the option to win 3, having the ability to win 3 straight championships, Kelly, they beat down Florida State, and the win is still about Florida State and how they looked coming off of the moment where they didn't get in. It's not about Georgia, and I think it should be.
No, you're absolutely right. I saw a graphic yesterday, and I had to fact check it. 27 opt-outs, injuries, etc. for Florida State. Hutton, do you know how many the Georgia Bulldogs had prior to that game?
How many?
27. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. But the whole idea of last week we talked about, I used the analogy, Florida State just took their Xbox and went home, and it looked worse than that. They never want to come back again. They never want to be taken seriously again. And I kind of have to feel for Mike Norvell. That's really a difficult spot to try to motivate your team who just had their guts ripped out and were left basically out in the rain. And now we're seeing all of the after effects, whether they leave the ACC and the ACC has to find other members. It's going to be an interesting next year. But you're absolutely right. We're focusing on all the things that don't matter. Georgia would have been a favorite to Michigan. Georgia would have been a favorite to Alabama. They would have been a favorite to Washington, and they would have been a favorite to Texas. But the bottom line is you still have to play the games. And because Georgia's lost to Alabama before in an SEC championship game, they didn't come to play that day, at least not in that particular moment in time. They were 6-point favorites in that one, Hutton. That kind of alludes to that 6-7 out of 10 times or somewhere in between, they should win that football game. Do I believe that the way that they played that day, that would have been the case? No, absolutely not. Now, I do think that going forward, we're going to see more SEC teams get in, whether they should or not, because of these types of scenarios. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the other Power 5 conferences when we start to expand to the 12-team college football playoff.
I love what Kirby Smart said after the game, too, after the 63-3 beatdown of FSU and about all those opt-outs, because he said people need to see what happened tonight and they need to fix this. Speaking of college football, it needs to be fixed. It's very unfortunate that they have a very good football team, good program. They're in the position that they're in. Everybody can say it's their own fault. It's their own problem. We can say that we had our guys, they didn't have their guys. I can listen to all that, but college football has to decide what they want. I know things are changing. Things are going to change next year. You know what? There's going to still be bowl games outside of those. People have to decide what they want and what they really want to get out of it, because it's really unfortunate for the kids on the sideline that had to play in the game and they didn't have their full arsenal. It affected the game 100%. It absolutely did. I think in large part they need to push back the timetable for the portal and push back, and it's on the NFL for this, push back the option on if you're going pro or not. But I do wonder how this will affect a 12-team playoff versus a 4-team playoff with opt-outs. We're not going to see it as much. We saw it in Texas with Malik Murphy, who, because of that timetable, wasn't there on the sideline with Texas because he opted out. He's preparing for something else. Kelly, Kirby Smart's right, but Kirby Smart put an exclamation point on the win of Florida State, regardless of the circumstance. It did affect the game massively. But I think even if Florida State's playing that game with more healthy players, mentally they're still not there. all of this started when Norvell admitted, and we all saw it live whenever they knew they weren't in, that they were checking out. Because that's what they were told. Hey, you're not worthy of being in. You're playing the ACC, and while you're unbeaten, you're not as good as some other teams that are behind you right now. They're jumping you. Peace. Have fun with Georgia.
It really was unfortunate for that fact, but I do think that from the outside looking in now, of course, hindsight always 2020. I do think that Florida State would have still gotten absolutely smoked by a couple of these other teams. And that is not because they're playing with a second or third string quarterback. That's just because if you look at the strength of schedule, yes, Florida State had a great defensive line, one of the best in the country.
Yes.
I'm not going to deny that. But I do have to kind of wonder at some point in time if these tougher schedules that some of these teams play don't start to come into fruition. There was this Florida State team struggled with a couple of other teams, Boston College. They did get a late cover over Pitt. Maybe they shouldn't have beat Clemson. I know that I was on the Florida Gators there with a backup quarterback, and that one got a little dicey, in a rivalry game. Florida State looked really, really good to start the season. Injuries did pile up. Obviously, losing Jordan Travis was hurtful for them. But from a power ratings wise, Oregon, if you listen to all the bookmakers, Oregon should have gotten over Washington. I mean, you still have to play the game. Did they still deserve to play the game? Absolutely. But I have a feeling that they would not have been near as exciting as the two games we got to watch yesterday.
Yeah, but Washington is the great example of why Florida State cannot be counted out. And regardless of the injuries, plural, and the opt-outs, the main reason Florida State did not get in was because Jordan Travis was not the quarterback. That was the sole focus, the committee said, as to why we saw Alabama get in with the one loss and not Florida State at the 4 seed. Starting tomorrow, the only place to catch OutKick's original and fearless content live is going to be on our website, outkick.com. You're going to be able to catch up on YouTube post-show live. But for all of our live unfiltered content, you head over to the Watch tab. You just click the Watch tab at outkick.com. You're not going to miss a beat. In 2024, outkick.com/watch. It's your one-stop shop for all things OutKick. The Eagles lose. I'm out of my elimination pool. I'm dead to rights going into the final week. Congratulations, Davey. And they lose to the Arizona Cardinals, which allows Dallas to win and host a playoff game and potentially more. Dallas at home, legit. The Eagles right now, they have to find something. Losing to Arizona and then losing the way they have recently, I have all the talent in the world. Kelly, I'm coming around to your side of this, that the Super Bowl loser from a year ago is not going to be they're going to continue the trend. They're not the outlier, where traditionally if you lose in the Super Bowl, you either don't get back to the postseason or you certainly don't come close to the Super Bowl the following year. Philly's talented enough to do it. I don't know what's changed when they've changed their defensive coordinator in Week 15. Quarterback Jalen Hurts is speaking on continuity and commitment. Something's going on behind the scenes that wasn't there a year ago. Arizona goes in and wins, and now Dallas, the team you do not want to go on the road and face, they have the opportunity to have the home field advantage from their perspective in Jerry's world. Got some help from the officials against Detroit, but nonetheless, they get it done. And they didn't have to win on Sunday to find out that they can win this weekend and control it. That's a massive result for Philadelphia and for Dallas.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting NFC East playoff scenario, right? We had spoke about this last week, right? A couple of teams just going to go on cruise control right now. I think that's what the Philadelphia Eagles did on Christmas. They went on cruise control. Oh, we just have to beat the Giants twice and the Cardinals. I only got to catch a couple of plays from that game, and that's because I didn't have any action on it. But what in the world was Philadelphia thinking? Just got it. No big deal. Just got to beat the Arizona Cardinals. This Cardinals team is the same team who were 12.5-point underdogs that beat another team in their division, the Dallas Cowboys. This is the same team that should have beaten the New York Giants there a few weeks into the season. I mean, what? One of our guests last week literally said, no, it's the NFL. We don't overlook each other. Well, I call BS because that is exactly what the Philadelphia Eagles did last week.
Well, they've been held to under 20 points in 3 of their last 4 games. Hurts is in the offense. They just don't they found their footing early. And he was getting the football to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, even Julio Jones. He had 2 touchdowns in the first half. And then the other side of the ball, the Arizona defense, with Jonathan Gannon coming back to Philadelphia, the former defensive coordinator, pulls out the NFL, the upset of the NFL going into Week 17, where just flat. Philadelphia was just flat in the second half. And meanwhile, the Cardinals, they're not as bad as I expected them to be. They play hard. I am shocked by that, given the fact that I thought it was going to be a disaster with Jonathan Gannon and that hire. But with they have wins over the Cowboys, Steelers, and now the Eagles, and all of those teams are in the playoff hunt. That is a great sign for a team that had no business being listed in that category with wins over those teams in 2023.
I'm pretty sure this is where the saying any given Sunday came, because in college football, we don't have these types of upsets all the time, right? There are definitely double-digit underdogs that went out right every single Saturday, but the parity in college football is so significantly different than the NFL. These are still professional teams. These are guys that are playing for incentives. These guys are playing for starting positions next year, maybe playing for a trade. Why this happens all the time is mind-boggling to me. We almost saw the Bills right before that lose to the Chargers and Easton Stick. This is what makes NFL so great. But as back to the Eagles, I said they were this year's Vikings. They were this team that kept winning 1-score games. They had some of the best second half stats throughout the season until about 6 weeks ago. And I think the wheels started to fall off. This defense started to get exploited. And that was because when you give offensive coordinators in the NFL enough time, they're going to find out your weaknesses. The secondary was absolutely a liability there for a little bit. And yes, when you start double teaming guys like A.J. Brown, you've got to be able to open it up somewhere. And unfortunately, you cannot win games with 1 yard at a time doing the brotherly shove.
No. Hey, for whatever reason, that's the most exciting play that we've seen from them in recent weeks. And meanwhile, Dallas, Kelly, I'm curious from the Vegas perspective here. They win at home. They're now 16-0 at home. In those games prior to the 1-point win over Detroit, which we'll get to this call in a second, prior to that 1-point win over Detroit this past weekend, they had won their previous 7 games, counting this up, 7 games by nearly 25 points, just at the 25-point mark. And then on the road, they're 3-5, and they have defeats, 3 of them, by 12 points or more. That's a lopsided evidence. They're going to get 2 games at home. If San Francisco were to lose the opening round of the playoffs go through Dallas, and the Cowboys have that path. This increases the pressure on Mike McCarthy, but man, this would be massive if the Cowboys could get that.
Yeah, America's team. We're going to see what they're really made of, being able to go on the road in the second half of the playoffs if the Niners lose. But look, I think they kind of have a golden horseshoe, Hutton. I watched that Detroit Lions game. I could not believe. We talked about the pair that Jim Harbaugh had. Oh, my gosh. Dan Campbell only got overshadowed just momentarily. That was completely ballsy to go out there and say, you know what, we don't care. We'll take the penalty, and we're still going for 2 because you want to win football games. I would not have gone for 2 on the 7-yard line. I would have kicked it and
no hesitation.
Giving myself a little more. Yeah, but there was not a single. He was like, I'm going to win this football game. And sometimes arrogance can get the best of you. I don't know if that was arrogance, though. I think that was just pure Dan Campbell trusting his team and what their capabilities are. The Dallas Cowboys, how do I say this nicely? I grew up in the 90s, Hutton, where everybody had the Dallas Cowboys starter jackets, right?
Yep.
Everybody was the Dallas Cowboy fan. And that's probably some point in time when they got the America's team reference. They're like the Texas Longhorns to me. Every year they're back. Every year everybody wants to wager on them. So from a Vegas perspective, I always have to take a step back and say, okay, what am I missing here from this Dallas Cowboys team that everybody else is so enamored with? Well, right now, Dak is playing at a very high level. Last weekend, one of my wagers was Dak to throw an interception, and everybody said, Kelly hasn't thrown an interception in like 5 games. Well, it was right out of the gate almost. And that's because there are certain defenses that can get good reads on him. They throw him out of his rhythm, and it's going to be a long day for Dak. Again, at home, they are a different team. So I think it is going to be interesting to see, at least for the first couple rounds of the playoffs, going through Dallas and what they're able to do. I mean, it's been a long time since the Dallas Cowboys have been in the Super Bowl. I think it's going to be even longer because I don't think they're going to get there this year.
Hey, one thing I know that we're not going to see that we should, the NFL, Brad Allen's crew, and Brad Allen, who has been a long-time head referee for the league, you normally don't see him screw things up. It's normally some other guys that are also for household names as officials. Kelly, we're not going to hear any explanation. All we're hearing from is Adam Schefter detailing things. We're hearing protocol of how to report and do this and that post-game from reporters and insiders instead of the actual league and the officials and the officials' office. I don't know how you can get through that matchup and go through that call and not explain it better or in some way whatsoever than what they've done, which is just feed info and analysis and rules and how they perceive it to be and what happened with the protocol of 68 reporting, but he was Brad Allen said 70 report. What a cluster. What a cluster on a play where Detroit's going to win in a walk-off.
Yeah, cluster is a nice way to put it there, Hutton. I had no skin in the game, so Good. I didn't have a reason to get angry, if you will, as far as the winner went there. If I was a Detroit Lions fan, though, I don't think I'd be very happy. And you're right. These refs make this entire game about them. There's flags all over the field all the time. They can't wait, it seems like some days, to get on the mic. And now they want to go radio silence and not just say, hey, here's what happened. Either A, we screwed up, and here's why, or B, we didn't screw up. Too bad. See you later. There's got to be some sort of accountability here. Chad said it a couple of weeks ago, is that he thought like where we're hitting with officials because they are so highly scrutinized and because nobody wants to do these jobs that we're seeing less and less people wanting to become officials. And now they're having like high school games on, Tuesdays and Wednesday nights just because there's a lack of. Well, think about the lack of at that level, at that high level. It's you're going to be scrutinized and you are underneath the spotlight and you are expected to be right 100% of the time because guess what? Your decision, your opinion, your job can definitely dictate games. And unfortunately, it cost the Detroit Lions one.
Yep. And I mean, it had a mass exodus of some head refs that went into retirement or back to their day-to-day job over the last couple of years. Kelly Stewart in for Chad Withrow. Coming up, John McClain will jump into the mix. We'll talk more NFL, including the Baltimore Ravens, who beat down the Miami Dolphins. And because of the Dolphins' loss, it sets up an AFC East showdown for the top between the Bills and Dolphins in Week 18. Plus, we've got the MVP odds and much more. John McClain straight ahead. Hot Mic with Hutton Withrow rolls on across the OutKick Network.
When everything was really starting to hit the fan.
Yeah.
And you had captioned it, just spent the morning with my close friend, the great at Jim Harbaugh, go blue. Woo! What's your relationship with Jim Harbaugh like?
Oh, I've known him since '89. We're very close.
How did you become such good friends?
He came to watch him wrestle when he was playing quarterback for the Bears in 1989. I wrestled Ricky Steamboat, and he came to the matches. And
wow.
then he invited me to talk to the 49ers to motivate him when he was coaching at the 49ers. And then this ridiculous scandal came out that I went to war with Paul Feinbaum. Idiot.
What happened with Paul?
Paul just, here's what happened. So I was, Sophia ran on the 2017 National Championship track team at Georgia. So I'm standing there with the track coach, Herschel Walker, me, and the whole crowd going crazy with them introducing the team. And Kirby Smart walks over and shakes Herschel's hand, and then the coach, and didn't even say a word to me. So when they were playing them, I said, "Don't make a mistake. You're not going to be played to me. I don't care who you are, who do you think you are." And Feinbaum is such a SEC guy that so he when this ridiculous scandal came out about them, I don't know whether it was taking plays or they were saying the cameras are on the side. I can't even remember what was so absurd. And they suspended him and all that. And so Paul sent me a text. I just said, "You're out of your mind." And what he said was, which is so absurd because you understand sports, obviously, having worked with this man. He said that because of the ridiculous scandal going on in Michigan, that the NFL would never have him. Guess how many teams have called him?
How many?
I can't tell you, but
what more than 5?
I would say I don't want to. I'll just tell you he's been contacted.
Well, okay. I mean, he's obviously ultra talented. So I mean,
he took the 49ers to the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, not to reveal anything. I know that you are a very loyal guy. You want to make sure the secrets stay close to the vest. But
well, I would tell you, but the problem is it turns into.
Yeah.
I said, she said, and then.
Do you think though that he's going to remain at Michigan, or you think he's going to head to the NFL? What do you think is going to end up ultimately happening after this season?
I don't know. I think he likes Michigan, but I think his kids are at the age now where we traveled. They'd be okay with that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You kind of when the kids are young, you kind of want to stay in one place, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if he left. I just really hope they win the national championship this year. He deserves it. He's been through a lot, and I cannot tell you, there's not a finer man alive.
Hot Mike with Henry Withrow rolls on across the OutKick network. Kelly Stewart joins us in for Chad, who will be rejoining the show tomorrow. 6th and Peabody, our location with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Hey, the OutKick store is up and live right now at OutKick.com. The new and improved OutKick store. It's finally there for you. Stock up on golf polos, T-shirts, hats, and all of the merch right now. Shop.outkick.com. Joined by John McClain, Sports Radio 610. He's covered the league for nearly 5 decades. A lot to get into as we go into the final week of the season in what was a jam-packed, exciting, controversial Week 17. John, how are you? Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, guys. Texans play Saturday night. They haven't even had a late window game on Sunday. Every game started at noon. Now they get the royal treatment from ESPN and ABC, and they go to Indy where they won last year in a humongous game at the end of the season in which they scored at the end, went for 2, made it, won the game. Everybody was infuriated in Houston because it cost them the top pick in Bryce Young.
And now what does it set up for Houston now? What do you make of this team going into the final week?
With C.J. Stroud back, they won by 23. That's the first time the Texans had won a game that wasn't decided in the last 30 seconds since October 1st when they beat the Steelers by 24. Every game they've won has been close. They're 6-3 in games decided by 6 or less or in the last 30 seconds. So it was nice to have a game you knew was going to be settled. I started already working on my column in my report card about the start of the fourth quarter. But if they win Saturday night, they need the Titans to beat the Jaguars. And I believe if Ryan Tannehill is the quarterback, because he's auditioning for another job, he's healthy, he's got experience, I think the Titans have a better chance than playing a Will Levis who is banged up big time.
Detroit and Dallas, the offensive linemen reporting, not reporting, who was eligible, who wasn't. What do you make of the debacle for Detroit, who thought they had just gone up and scored on a 2-point conversion to go up by 1, and with seconds remaining, the game looked over. Detroit was going to go to Dallas, where no one wins, and win in Week 17. Instead, Dallas ends up winning that game, where Dan Campbell continues to go for 2 on those snaps. And the explanation was so back and forth post-game, I'm still not sure what occurred.
Well, I can tell you exactly what happened. The Lions tried to outsmart the Cowboys by sending 3 linemen over to the referee, hoping to confuse the Cowboys, and all they did was confuse the referee, who should have stopped. And he was too concerned with getting the game to continue. Instead, he just listened quickly and kept going. And he thought Dan Skipper, number 70, checked in when it was 68. Taylor Decker, who caught the pass, but the Lions outsmarted themselves. There ought to be a rule one guy can go over, because it's got to be announced. And I thought it was interesting. Dan Campbell said, I told him before the game, well, the referee's not even involved in that meeting before the game with the coaches. So the Lions got too cute, and the referee blew it. And so now they'll work on that all season when it comes to the rules. And Dan Campbell's got to learn when to kick, and instead of being so stubborn. But and I don't like the Cowboys, and it worked out great for the Cowboys. Now they might fool around and actually get an NFC Championship game for the first time since I was in diapers.
Well, let's look to that, because they, with a win, can have home field advantage, which is massive for Dallas, John, as we all know, especially this season. What do you make of the Dallas Cowboys at home in the postseason?
I don't trust Mike McCarthy in big game moments. He showed it again in that game when he was throwing the ball instead of running at the end, forcing the Lions to use timeouts. I saw a thing that figured up they gave the Lions 40 extra seconds with his clock management. We've seen it before in big games. Now, if they're blowing people out like they usually do at home, that's fine. But when it comes down to close games in which the head coach has got to make smart decisions, I do not trust Mike McCarthy. But they've been invincible at home, unbeaten, averaging almost 40 points a game. It's their best chance to get back to the Super Bowl, because Philadelphia just spit the bit, choking like crazy. Losing at home to Arizona is inexcusable. And, of course, San Francisco is still, to me, the best team. I don't see the Cowboys beating the 49ers, who whipped them big time during the season.
All right, John, we're going to switch gears to the other conference, because you and I both have a nice ticket on the Ravens. That's who we both picked to win the Super Bowl. So last weekend, very happy with the results. Now my Dolphins to win the AFC East ticket is not feeling as good. Let's break down the AFC East here. Are the Dolphins just pretenders? What's going on in Miami?
Well, I think they're Super Bowl pretenders. There's not but 2 or 3 teams that look like they're capable of getting to the Super Bowl this year. The 2 teams that have home field advantage are definitely the best. But Miami, despite injuries to pass rushers, despite injuries to the running game, I think as long as Tua Tagovailoa is healthy, and I believe this is the first time he's ever played a full season, going back to when he was a freshman in Alabama, as long as he's there and Tyreek Hill there, they can afford to lose to Jason Waddle. I think that whipping they got from Buffalo in the first game, and the fact that it's a monstrous game, I think they're going to win it. I think they're going to get in. I think the Steelers are going to win. I think Buffalo wins the division, or they miss the playoffs. And wouldn't that be something? Because nobody wants to play them right now.
That would be very true. I am nervous for Sunday's game, but I want to talk more about week 18 in general here. So week 17, when I first got into handicapping, was always tough. You didn't know who was playing. You didn't know if the coach was telling the truth about who was playing. Now we added in an extra week here. Week 18, tell me how you like to navigate it from either a fan perspective. Who cares? Who doesn't care? Who should we be believing here? And then for myself, obviously there's several games with several implications that actually matter, but I'm kind of thinking, let's look at the Ravens maybe saying, yeah, sure, we're going to set Lamar. he doesn't need to play. We've got Tyler Huntley, who's a carbon copy of Lamar, if you will. And we get to maybe spoil our arch rivals, the Steelers, playoff hopes. I mean, do you take those types of things into account?
I do, but a team has to look at itself first. And if you think if they give Lamar off this weekend, then he's got 2 more weeks off. We've seen examples of teams, coaches have given the main players 3 weeks off and it's backfired. So it wouldn't surprise me if John Harbaugh doesn't play him a little bit and then put Huntley in. And because so much of Lamar's passing is based on timing, and he needs all the time he can get. And right now he's got to prove he can win in the playoffs. He's won 1 playoff game in his career. He's runaway MVP. But I think they're not going to keep him on the sideline for 3 weeks. He'd probably go crazy. And there's a good chance they'll win that game with Huntley at home because he played the last year, maybe can't remember if he played 2 years ago. At this time of year, Kelly, I like the teams that have their quarterbacks healthy. Now, if you're lucky to have a Joe Flacco and you're wacko for Flacco, that's great. But that bubble could burst anytime based on the way he's played in the past. But give me the quarterbacks who are healthy all season, because if you're missing your quarterback this time of year, even if you're the Browns, you got to be worried.
John McClain with us. You can follow him on social at McClain_on_NFL. John, we have the Cleveland Browns who are in the postseason. Are they just sitting? They're going to sit Flacco for the final week of the season?
He sat long enough. Now, they, of course, don't want to take a chance on him getting hurt, but you know he wants to play. He hasn't gotten hit a lot, which is amazing considering he's 6'6". He's got a little mobility, but he's a pocket passer, and he's got a lot of interceptions. So I'm guessing he might get some playing time unless he's got an injury we don't know about that needs resting. But, I think if you sit him and he comes back and he's not as hot as he was before he had to sit, Kevin Stefanski is going to regret that big time. I think I would play him a little bit just to let him get a feel of it and then bring him in at maybe halftime or at the end of a couple of drives.
Kelly's going to go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, sorry, Hutton. No, I wanted to kind of go over to the NFL draft after watching the college football playoff last night. Hutton and I raved about it for the first 30 minutes of the show. Like, what great games we got to, have as a treat there. But I kind of have to wonder if we have some quarterbacks whose draft stock has went up a little bit, maybe a quarterback or two whose draft stock has went down. Caleb Williams still is kind of the front runner here, but I'm curious as to what your opinions are for some of these guys and how that correlates to the NFL.
I'm covering the NFL for 48 years. The NFL scouts will never admit this. They don't care what they do in college. They only care what they do in shorts and T-shirts at their pro day, private workouts, Senior Bowl workouts, when they meet them for lunch and dinner. You can be a mediocre prospect and you can go up a couple of rounds if you look good at the Underwear Olympics, as they call the combine. Yes, Michael Penix is fabulous. He's been playing like that all year. I've watched 4 of his games. That was the 5th one. He's going to be 24 years old, but a lot of these quarterbacks are older now because they've spent so much time in college, and the injury factor will be something he'll really have to deal with. He'll get poked and prodded by team doctors so much trying to look at those 2 torn ACLs. But he is magnificent in a draft that's going to be magnificent from quarterbacks. It'll still be Caleb Williams or Drake May, I believe, when everything is said and done. Then you'll have Daniels, Penix, Nix, Quinn Ewers. I think he'll go back to Texas. Arch Manning will sit another year or compete with him for the starting job, but it would not be smart for Ewers to come out now. He needs to go back to school, stay another year, play, improve. He's really only had 1 full season as a starter, competing against other quarterbacks who have multiple years as a starter. And think about Washington, great receivers, great linemen. Michigan loaded with linemen. People think J.J. McCarthy's also going to be a number 1 pick. They can't all go in the first round, but it's too bad because the time we get close to the draft, nobody's going to be talking about what the quarterbacks did in the bowl games of the season. It's all going to be how they did at the All-Star game workouts, not the games, but the workouts, their pro days, their combines, and their private workouts for teams.
John, finally for you, Bills and Dolphins. Bills win. AFC East up for grabs here. Same for the Dolphins in what is going to be a great matchup. If Josh Allen and company beat Miami, what does that do for Allen's chase for MVP? Because right now it is all Lamar Jackson. But as Kelly brought up, what happens in Week 18 and who plays and who doesn't, and the fact that Buffalo was written off weeks ago.
Well, he hadn't played very well in the last 2 games, so he has no prayer. Nobody's got a prayer. It's Lamar Jackson or bust. The way it's set up, it's all regular season. The voters will vote for MVP, offensive player, and defensive player. And a bigger issue to me is who's going to win offensive player, Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill. But Lamar is a lock.
Still blows my mind that the players, especially the quarterbacks, didn't back Lamar Jackson more when he was demanding the guaranteed money, because he's run it back after getting the contract, and he's a lopsided favorite for MVP right now. John McClain, always great to catch up with you. Thanks for joining us today. Happy New Year to you. We look forward to next week's visit.
Kelly and Jonathan, thank you guys very much. Kelly, good luck to the Ravens and the Dolphins.
There it is. There's John McClain. Kelly, coming up as we kick off hour number 2, let's dive into 2 things and the result of a national championship. How we will view Jim Harbaugh and how we will view Washington as a program going to the Big Ten. That's straight ahead. Hot Mic with Hutton Withrow rolls on.
What you're experiencing is the bold taste of a Southern legend. Old Smoky Moonshine and Whiskey, authentic Tennessee mountain-style spirits. We believe in crafting flavors that were born from tradition but defy expectation, and pioneering a new experience with every sip. Because if it doesn't do this, it ain't this. Old Smoky Moonshine and Whiskey.
Welcome into OutKick, the show. I am Clay Travis, your fearless leader. I am going to continue to argue that sports is one of the great unifying forces in all of American life. ESPN is a sinking ship. Democrats are now the party of the white, woke college graduate.
We live in a land of participation trophies.
You gotta lean into the turns. You really gotta lean into the turns.
When Leah Thomas walked in that first day, it got silent, and every girl was uncomfortable.
Very difficult to go back-to-back years in the NFL with the number 1 overall pick.
Is it fair for people to be upset with Barbie?
I've been out of LA long enough to have forgotten that libs, no matter how ridiculous the scenario, are gonna live. Another week of inflation, another week with Biden with COVID, and another set of losers to crown. People don't watch the WNBA on TV, in person, on a plane, on a train, on a bus, or on purpose. I mean, what have you seen firsthand of how this has affected you in the plant and your fellow employees? Under Joe Biden, the Taliban has retaken Afghanistan. Putin has invaded Ukraine. So if there was ever a time for freaking aliens to inhabit and conquer Earth, now would be that time.
We've seen coaches throw water bottles. We've seen coaches act like idiots. We've seen coaches slap other coaches. But I think if you're involved in carjacking, you're inherently a rotten human. The level of stupid that sometimes gets on our YouTube chat just gives me a headache. You're born a male, play with males. You're born a female, play with females. Don't at me about it. The American people are being cheated. We, ladies and gentlemen, are being cheated.
I made the call to end the Me Too movement. And today I'm going to continue making that case. And that's just a way to further taunt these women, to make them feel less than, to make them realize that this has just become a big joke. Deion Sanders is the Donald Trump of football.
We were directly impacted by the whole Leah Thomas thing, and we were able to see you guys on the ground with your signs supporting. That was huge.
They were saying, oh, it's only 1 or 2. That's rubbish. And we all know that's rubbish. Once those trans-identifying males were able to succeed, it just encouraged others.
Old Smoky Moonshine and Whiskey. Old Taste of the Southern Region.
Just like that, final hour is here. Hot Mic with Hutton Withrow across the OutKick network. We are glad you are with us on the first show of 2024. And starting tomorrow, it'll be the first show streaming exclusively at OutKick.com. It's the only way to stream the show live starting tomorrow. For all of the original and fearless shows, it will be at OutKick.com. You'll be able to catch up on YouTube post-show, but all of our live, unfiltered content, head over to the Watch tab at OutKick.com, your one-stop shop for all things OutKick. College football playoff delivered. Kelly Stewart joins us with Chad Withrow on the trek back from Nebraska. I believe he has a layover, and then he's in Omaha, then St. Louis maybe right now, Kelly. So good luck to Withrow getting back, and he's back with us tomorrow. Kelly, thank you for filling in for him throughout the last week or so.
Absolutely. Listen, it's been a real treat getting to hang out either in studio or working remote. I'm hoping Chad had a wonderful family vacation. I had to kick my family out and make them go to the beach to watch the sunset so I could do this show in peace.
Kick them out to the sunset at the beach? That's not bad.
Just said, hey, it's beautiful out. You guys should take real advantage. Can you take the dogs with while you're at it?
Hey, I don't know if you're like me, but I noticed the lack of discussion in the broadcast about Michigan, the scandal, Connor Stallions, Jim Harbaugh, all that. It was, in a weird way for me, refreshing that I didn't have to think about it all the time. And I know the storyline, but it is a massive storyline for the NCAA and just what we had Michigan and watched Michigan go through over the course of the 2023 season. And I'm also subconsciously thinking, is this going to be vacated down the road? And why does anyone care about the fact that it would be when we've all witnessed Michigan beat Alabama and potentially win a title over Washington? I don't understand the timetable of what the NCAA is doing, but here we are in 2024 discussing the same slow process that college football and college athletics in general is all about. And who knows? I mean, 2 or 3 years from now, we could be watching a super conference that's governed by its own entity and commissioner more than the NCAA that will just be concluding their investigation in Ann Arbor.
Hutton, Connor Stallions was at the football game.
Yeah,
there were pictures of people taking selfies with him, and he had good seats. I mean, the fact that ESPN didn't talk about it, does that surprise me? I mean, I had the game on. I was watching it. I was also cooking dinner and doing a few other things, so I could have maybe not heard any real discussion of it, but I would not expect anything else from them. They got to tiptoe around certain issues. But as far as the NCAA goes, taking their sweet time here, kind of tells you maybe there's a lot to either unpack or they haven't found enough information or evidence to really be able to lay the hammer here. Could they vacate this win later on down the road? Would it surprise any of us? No, but as of right now, I mean, Harbaugh's coaching in the game. Michigan just won. Connor Stallions, again, in the stands. It doesn't seem like maybe it's all going to be that bad in Ann Arbor come in the next 6 months or so.
Well, and they've doubled down, and they put the chips to the middle of the table on Harbaugh and his program with how they've reacted to all of this, continuing with the reports about the 10-year offer that's on the table again for Harbaugh, who is he's a weird dude, but he was also very quiet and soft-spoken, where he's handing the mic away very, very quickly. Compared to the way he would go through and discuss America's team, his players. Always quirky and bizarre, but I also thought it was bizarre of how quiet he was given the fact that they just beat Alabama and they're on to the national championship game as the number 1 seed and the favorite. Connor Stalions being in attendance doesn't surprise me, but he attended at least, 7 games prior to Michigan facing their future opponents, per The Athletic. I'm also like, I'm thinking to myself, it's just kind of crazy that what the Big Ten did in the 3-game suspension, that, and I said at the time, it will be viewed as their penalty, their punishment has been served, time served, on to the next thing. And that's how ESPN chose to treat it last night. There's no doubt that Fowler and Herbstreit had made a conscious effort not to discuss it because Herbstreit was praising Fowler post-game with SVP on Scott Van Pelt's show and said, that game is just about the ball. He loves calling games with Fowler because it's just about the game. That, hearing the Stallions report that he's there and all of the controversy that we've talked about all season, ESPN covered that story. They allowed former Michigan players to have the floor on College Game Day and speak on it. But beyond, the storyline, there's a lot of depth to that was left out of the magnitude of what Michigan accomplished last night.
Yeah, I'd like to think that Herbstreit and Fowler are professionals. Do you think maybe they got a call that said, hey, keep this to a minimum? I mean, at this point in time in their careers, it's pretty hard to silence them, but there could have been a call from higher ups that said, hey, listen, let's just enjoy this game. I mean, like you said, it was actually a little refreshing just for it to be a football game. And I think we could say that about sports in general. Whatever happened to it just being a football game.
Yeah, and that's what I enjoy about sports, because it can just be about the game. You can make it about that anytime you want. You go to a stadium, you don't care who you're sitting next to. I love that aspect of what sports brings to the table, especially college football and the NFL. But that goes across the board. And then, the storyline of Washington, where I'm watching Texas have the football in the final seconds. I thought the Longhorns were going to score. I thought they were going to the national championship game. Instead, it's Washington who got up big, could have been a larger deficit that Texas was facing. And I felt like it should have been, and it felt like it was a larger lead than what it was. But Washington holds on with their defense. And now we discuss a lot about Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC. The discussion hasn't been really the same with Washington and Oregon. I think it's because the Pac-12 is just going away. And as the light goes out on the Pac-12 after Washington's matchup against Michigan, if they win the title, there is a massive momentum swing towards the Big Ten and the teams joining in what it means for Ohio State and Michigan, what it means for Penn State, who loses to Ole Miss and doesn't look like a team that would have been deserving of being in a 12-team playoff based on the way we saw them play against top teams like Michigan, Ohio State, and now Ole Miss. All that to say, entering better programs and more talent, what an excellent opportunity for Tony Petitti to put an exclamation point on who's joining and how fast all of that's coming together.
I, for one, think it's going to be a rude awakening for Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC. Now you're changing where you're recruiting from. You're changing hands as far as money goes, right? We know Texas has some of the deepest pockets in college football. But now you're not competing against the K-States of the world. You're competing against the Alabamas of the world, the Georgias of the world. I think it's going to be really interesting. Missouri, been in the SEC for a little over a decade now. Hey, they finally got to make a statement, winning 10 games, now 11 with their bowl game. This is an interesting, very interesting dynamic here, because are Texas and Oklahoma going to turn into Mizzou, which could take a little while, and actually have a presence? Or are they going to be like a Texas A&M, where we see them on a coaching carousel for the next decade, where nothing's ever good enough? No matter how much oil money you have, you can't buy yourself a national championship. But you're absolutely right. I'm excited, not from a geographical perspective. I think it's going to be weird to see, Big Ten games after dark. We used to call them Pac-12 after dark, start here at 11, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. here on the East Coast. I think it's going to be an interesting, we'll call it like a home field advantage, if you will, right? When teams have to go to Hawaii to play. We know it kind of messes with their rhythm. Going to, the Coliseum.
Yeah.
Wisconsin going to play USC in the Coliseum, like two completely different styles of play. The 4 teams going to the Big Ten from the Pac-12, I think, are going to be oddly weird. I think it's going to have such a different dynamic. It's going to be a really fun scenario to handicap that we only got to really for bowl games and every once in a while, some of those early non-conference games. But Texas, Oklahoma going to the SEC, I'm just kind of like, But Washington, USC, UCLA, not so much. Definitely Oregon. I can picture Oregon going to play Rutgers now at 9 a.m. on an early Saturday morning. 17.5-point favorite. Somehow Rutgers covers because Oregon just didn't care.
With Texas and Oklahoma, they're still ahead of the vast majority. I mean, Texas finished 4th or 5th in the national recruiting rankings this past year, and you've still got Oklahoma that's right there too. That I'm fascinated to see the matchups out of the gate, and all the recruiting. You're right. That changes too based on the transfer portal and what we're seeing across college football. From this perspective, I'm going to get the Vegas mentality, Kelly, from you from this question. So DJU is transferring to Florida State, and they've got their quarterback. They were down to just one scholarship quarterback. Now they've got DJU. What does a transfer do to the perception of the program from the Vegas line? How much does a quarterback not playing affect the college game compared to the NFL? Is it drastically more or less than what we would see at the pro level?
Well, it depends. It depends all on who your backup is, right? You can have, we spoke about this. Let's use this as an example. We spoke about this about the Pop-Tart Bowl, right?
Yeah.
When Will Howard transferred, offensive coordinator took a new job. We saw the line drop 1.5 points. And in reality, it didn't matter because the difference between the starter and the backup was essentially a non-issue. There was no points difference, right? Now, let's just say it was going to be DJ and Jordan Travis was coming back, right? And one of them had to be the backup. I think we could argue there might be a 0.5 point difference here. That's where it gets really dicey. Whereas you and I spoke about Joe Flacco versus DTR. Well,
yes.
That's a pretty big drop-off. I'd say about 4.5 points. But PJ Walker to DTR, about 1 point. And that's where you have to really get into the depths of the teams. And that's what I always tell people, find a conference and focus on it. If you're looking to handicap, there's too many college football teams. It's no different than a backup point guard for a college basketball team. A point guard gets hurt going into the next game. Well, let's look at what his backup's been able to do. We have a guy that, comes in and plays a decent number of minutes and, is good for 8 or 9 points a game versus a guy who's never seen the court and is a true freshman. Well, we've got to really be able to look at that. And you can in the NFL because there's only 32 teams. College football is much deeper and much more intricate. I always buy a Phil Steele. I always try to listen to guys who, have followed these kids since high school, right? Because now all of a sudden you have a kid that's never seen the field. Well, of course I knew Avery Johnson was a serviceable backup because I've been following this kid since he was 16 years old in hopes that he would come play at my university.
Speaking of not playing at a university next year, Cam Ward is transferring to the NFL draft. He was long linked to Ohio State. That's not happening. At the Washington State quarterback, headed pro. And what's interesting is it doesn't appear as though he's hiring an agent, which means he could come back. That's fascinating, but he's clearly got enough information to make the jump. We've got Jim Nagy of the Reese's Senior Bowl coming up, who scouts the country with 18 of his staff members and scouts and former scouts. I'm interested to get his assessment of where Ward stacks up with the other quarterbacks, and there is a ton of quarterbacks going in the draft this year. Kelly, I know it's maybe it's a prop bet that won't be out for a long time or even offered at some sports books, but the first round quarterbacks, maybe an over-under instead of who goes where, it's always, I feel like, lower than the perceived number, but I don't know how high we're going to have it, and it may be the highest number we've ever seen in the first round of the NFL draft as far as the over-under and the perceived quarterbacks that teams are going to go after.
Yeah. Every year it's like 4.5, 5.5, somewhere in that number. I'm actually looking right now to see if I can find it on DraftKings. Maybe them or FanDuel might have it out. already. Look, bottom line, what are we seeing here? We just talked to John. John said, Quinn Ewers, guess what? He needs to go back to college. You know why? Because there's way too many guys declaring for the NFL draft. And I understand why Cam Ward wants to, but here we go. Caleb Williams, Drake May, Michael Penix Jr., Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix.
Yep.
Is JJ McCarthy going to go? Well, he hasn't said anything yet because he's still going to be playing for a national championship. But I can argue that maybe if he plays for a national championship, he wants to go. So you kind of have to wonder here, right? And then we've got guys, like you said, DJ transferring from Oregon State, KJ Jefferson, Will Howard was still talking about going to the NFL draft from Kansas State. I think actually he is going to be the one going to Ohio State. Some of these guys need to wait. Cam Ward, very, very athletic quarterback, put up some decent numbers. You know, Washington State was just an okay football team last year. But you kind of have to wonder if he's not hiring an agent, that's because he wants to see if he is going to get drafted and then give himself the opportunity, because there are plenty of schools that need starting quarterbacks, right? We know that Miami might be a spot where he would fit in really well in that offense. I mean, he is a junior, so that's something he needs to consider. I don't know if he got bad advice, if it's something he just wants to do. Maybe he is trying to kick around to see what his NIL money's worth.
Yeah, or maybe he just didn't get the type of offers that he thought he was going to receive in the portal, so he exited, and now he's going to get, maybe it's not a higher number, but more than whatever he would have received in the portal through, like you're saying, name, image, likeness with all the collectives there. So he's not immediately signed with the agent. I think that's important, and he's immediately into training for the draft instead of taking any suitors through college football. As far as the NFL goes, the playoff picture right now, here's who's clinched his playoff spot in the NFL going into Week 18 for the AFC. The Ravens, your number 1 seed. You have the Dolphins, still at the 2 spot in the AFC, despite their loss to Baltimore. They have a matchup coming to get up against Buffalo we'll speak on in a moment. Kansas City at 3. Browns, they've clinched the 5 spot. But the 3rd seed right now, Kelly, is Kansas City, and they hang on and win against Cincinnati this past weekend. I know that was a game you were eager to watch based on Cincinnati's defense and the success that they've had in recent games against Mahomes. It's still a Chiefs offense, though, it's just something that I can't trust. And the only thing I do trust in is the low scoring, not the perceived Mahomes magic. It's just not there, and it's not his fault.
I would say it's a little bit his fault. I don't want to give him no faults.
But even with the magic that he was praised for in the past, he's thrown bad picks. But it's they overcome that in the moments. In the moments, for the most part, Kansas City isn't that same team that is. They can still be clutch. They've got Mahomes. He's clutch. But they don't have the clutch players around him where just by a look, other than Kelsey, everything's cool, calm, and collected, regardless if they're running the proper play or not.
Yeah, nothing is still cool, calm, and collected. If you watch that Bengals game, it took him a while. I mean, I had a girlfriend who's a diehard Chiefs fan who was coming over for New Year's. And I said, hey, dinner's at, 7:00. She goes, I won't be over till after the game. I said, relax. She goes, I'm not leaving my couch. She goes, they have ruined my New Year's, because they were down to the Bengals 17-7 at one point in time.
Right.
And did they come back? That's what the Chiefs are supposed to do, right? That's what we've seen them do. Was I surprised they came back, won that game and covered? Line was close 6.5. They won that game by 8. Now they've clinched the AFC West. Nobody's going to play this week, right? Against the Chargers. They're, 3-point underdogs to the Chargers. That tells you everything you need to know. They're going to rest everybody, try to heal up a few injuries. But what I think they need to be doing is getting in some good reps and practice, because outside of Rashee Rice, these wide receivers have just been so frustrating, and you see it come out on Mahomes' face. Yes. You see it on the sidelines. You see Kelsey frustrated with himself. And while you don't see very much from Andy, he's pretty good at having the poker face, you can definitely tell there's an issue there, right? And would anybody be shocked for the Chiefs to go out and win the AFC and go back in the Super Bowl. A 10-6 Chiefs team still to this day, I don't think anybody would be like, I can't believe the Chiefs just went on a heck of a playoff run, because it's so expected from this team.
Yeah, and I mean, they would have to do it by going on the road to Baltimore, potentially against Miami, but maybe Buffalo, which, again, there's plenty of storyline there as the 3 seed. Over in the NFC, Kelly, looking at the teams that have clinched, there's 6. There's one spot up for grabs. 49ers, your 1 seed, locked in. You have the 49ers 1 seed locked into the division. You've got the Cowboys and the Lions at 2 and 3. Cowboys winning, Philadelphia losing. That's why the Cowboys are at 2. Eagles have clinched a spot. Their current potential comes down to who's going to win the NFC South. The Buccaneers and Packers are matched up for the 7 seed. You also have Seahawks, Saints, and Vikings on the outside looking in. But really, the 2 teams with a prayer, the Bucs and the Packers. And Green Bay at 8-8, Buccaneers at 8-8. I don't care who comes out of the South or if the Packers get in. It's not a matchup that I'm looking forward to watching, even if we're going to see the NFC South champ hosting a game.
Yeah, look, the NFC South, if you watched any part of that Saints game last week, I had the Saints in a teaser, which means I just needed them to lose by less than a touchdown, pretty much. It was bad. I mean, all of a sudden, Baker Mayfield turned into a pumpkin, and the Bucs defense, you have to go, where is Todd Bowles? I thought you were a defensive-minded coach. I did feel bad for some of my Bucs fans down here in Central Florida, but outside of that, now they have an easy, quote-unquote, easy win over the Panthers that are 2-14 and should have all but cashed it in. But like I asked John in the last segment, I want to know, some of these teams still want to play spoiler. They have not quit on their season, even though we'd like to think they have.
Tampa has Carolina, and if they win, they're in. They win the NFC South. Atlanta takes on New Orleans. Atlanta needs a win and a Tampa Bay loss to get in as the NFC South division title winner. Alphas and betas of the weekend. Alphas is where we're going to start today, and we've had some contenders, but we start just with the Washington Huskies in general. 10 wins now of 10 points or less, and the underdog factor is playing into the storyline of here's who no one expected to go unbeaten, and they could finish the season perfect, and they would need a win over Michigan, who could also finish the season perfect. What an excellent championship game we have coming up. And Michael Penix Jr., who is, while I think the average college football fan knows him, they haven't watched him total in the totality of the season. Maybe just glimpses in the matchups against Oregon, for instance. Maybe just glimpses in what we saw last night. But what we saw last night is a quarterback that can lead his team to a title, and they've got the head coach to do it too.
Oh, yeah. Kalen DeBoer. Gosh, he needs to get some more credit here.
Yeah.
I said this earlier in the show. I think John even alluded to it during his segment. It's tough when you live on the East Coast to watch that much Pac-12 football. I mean, you've got multiple games going on, and you have to kind of be really locked in and have more than just a vested fan interest in the Washington Huskies. I told you that I had the Washington Huskies in my college football season win pool, which I hedged and shouldn't have. That being said, I did guarantee myself money. I guaranteed myself a first place, if you will. That's why I always say I don't like to hedge, because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. But Washington was very good to me, even through some of those, like you mentioned, weather games, through some of those trials and tribulations. Washington State, that was historically one of those games where you want to take the underdog, and they were able to go in there, get a win, and get out, move on to the next game. And I think a lot of people didn't have multiple opportunities to watch this team. I think the first time most of America watched them was during the Pac-12 championship game.
Yeah.
I could not believe how many people were shocked that they beat Texas this year. But again, I almost got discredited because I'm a well-known Texas hater. No, I just like betting against this team.
We'll go rapid fire here. Lamar Jackson, do you have the MVP odds now and just how lopsided it is between the other options? Lamar Jackson is crushing and playing so great, and he's going to win his second MVP award.
I never used the word lock ever in my entire career. John used it. Yeah, he's a lock. He's minus 20,000 at most American sports books. A second place isn't even close. It's not even close anymore, Hutton. And that's the thing. He has just completely run away with it from basically the last 3 weeks since Brock Purdy, actually last 2 weeks, since Brock Purdy lost to the Ravens. It has flipped in Lamar's favor, and now he is in a dead sprint to win it.
The Iowa Hawkeyes, one of our betas, they go out in fashion like the offense should, not scoring in the bowl game against Tennessee. And how about Carolina owner David Tepper and what he did? What's he doing in this? Chucking the bottle into the stands and throwing the drink on a Jaguars fan. The most you can find an owner in the NFL is $500,000, but an owner throwing something at a fan, suspension. But I'm not sure what that could cause either. I'm certain that Goodell can do more than just suspend an owner. He can dock a draft pick. But again, Goodell works for the owners. The owners will have Goodell do something about this action.
Yeah, that's embarrassing.
It's awful.
Listen, we criticized Brittany Mahomes for spraying champagne on the crowd.
Right.
That's just sticky, smelly like feet, water, doesn't hurt anybody, but it's still not classy. This is a bottle and then an actual drink. You're an owner of an NFL team. I understand getting emotional. As a fan, I understand when you get frustrated and you want to do things. Yeah, as an owner, you just can never. It's beyond inexcusable. Also, why are the windows open? I get it. It's probably a beautiful day there, but like if I think if I'm the person in charge of that room, I'd be like, we should just keep these windows closed. You could clearly tell he had just had enough at that point in time.
Yeah, and they're still silent to my knowledge of the last couple of hours here. The NFL has acknowledged awareness of the video, but has said nothing else. Same goes for Tepper on this. Neither the team nor the league provided any further comment. They will be commenting soon, no doubt. Coming up, we dive into the talent on the field in the college football playoff, what it means for the NFL draft. We'll also discuss some of the potential playoff matchups, what's at stake in Week 18, and Jim Nagy's take, his perception of who's playing the best right now going into the postseason. That's straight ahead. Hot Mic with Hutton with her rolls on.
What you're experiencing is the bold taste of a Southern legend. Old Smoky Moonshine and Whiskey, authentic Tennessee mountain-style spirits. We believe in crafting flavors that were born from tradition but defy expectation, and pioneering a new experience with every sip. Because if it doesn't do this, it ain't this. Old Smoky Moonshine and Whiskey.
Welcome into OutKick the show. I am Clay Travis, your fearless leader. I am going to continue to argue that sports is one of the great unifying forces in all of American life. ESPN is a sinking ship. Democrats are now the party of the white, woke college graduate.
We live in a land of participation trophies.
You gotta lean into the turns. You really gotta lean into the turns.
When Leah Thomas walked in that first day, it got silent, and every girl was uncomfortable.
Very difficult to go back-to-back years in the NFL with the number one overall pick.
Is it fair for people to be upset with Barbie?
I've been out of LA long enough to have forgotten that libs, no matter how ridiculous the scenario, are gonna live. Another week of inflation, another week with Biden with COVID, and another set of losers to crown. People don't watch the WNBA on TV, in person, on a plane, on a train, on a bus, or on purpose. I mean, what have you seen firsthand of how this has affected you in the plant and your fellow employees? Under Joe Biden, the Taliban has retaken Afghanistan. Putin has invaded Ukraine. So if there was ever a time for freaking aliens to inhabit and conquer Earth, now would be that time.
We've seen coaches throw water bottles. We've seen coaches act like idiots. We've seen coaches slap other coaches. But I think if you're involved in carjacking, you're inherently a rotten human. The level of stupid that sometimes gets on our YouTube chat just gives me a headache. You're born a male, play with males. You're born a female, play with females. Don't at me about it. The American people are being cheated. We, ladies and gentlemen, are being cheated.
I made the call to end the Me Too movement. And today I'm going to continue making that case. And that's just a way to further taunt these women, to make them feel less than, to make them realize that this has just become a big joke. Deion Sanders is the Donald Trump of football.
We were directly impacted by the whole Leah Thomas thing, and we were able to see you guys on the ground with your signs supporting. That was huge.
They were saying, oh, it's only one or two. That's rubbish, and we all know that's rubbish. Once those trans-identifying males were able to succeed, it just encouraged others.
Old Smoky Moonshine and Whiskey. Full taste of the Southern Legend.
Hot Mic with Hunter Withrow rolls on across the OutKick Network, live from 6th and Peabody with EHA Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Glad you're with us. Streaming today, OutKick.com. And also starting tomorrow, that's the only place to catch OutKick's original and fearless show live. It's going to be on our website, OutKick.com. You'll be able to catch up on YouTube. But for all live content and unfiltered content, you head over to OutKick.com. You click the Watch tab, and you'll have everything right there available to you. One-stop shop. Kelly Stewart in for Chad Withrow. And we say hello to Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl, who scouts the country for the NFL's best headed into the NFL draft. Jim, Happy New Year to you, and thanks for joining us in what is a very busy time for you.
Yeah. Hey, Jonathan, Kelly, Happy New Year. Good to be on.
So just your overview of the two matchups we saw last night and the talent that's on the field that we will see on the field next year at the NFL level.
Well, we got lucky, didn't we? We went through this crazy bowl season where, I don't know, I didn't watch much of it. And then we get to the two games that mattered, and man, they were great. So it was a weird night for me. It was a house divided. I'm a Michigan grad. My wife is a Bama grad. As much as Michigan has kind of stumbled over themselves the last two CFPs, I was just hoping for a good game. And then we got to halftime. I'm like, all right, let's win this thing. So those games didn't disappoint. The two great games, great players stepped up. Really for all four teams. I mean, guys stepped up in big moments for all four teams, and we couldn't ask for better matchups. And in this one, Michigan, Washington should be great.
I want to get your take on two of the quarterbacks we watched last night and the winners here, J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. Let's start with McCarthy, Jim. I see a lot of mock drafts out there. I don't know if you're into that or not, but I like the perception of where players are, at least in the mindset of those that are just chatting this time of year. Is he, when you watch just the efficiency and the Harbaugh tie into the perception that Harbaugh has the NFL style and grooming a quarterback, in teaching a quarterback, do you buy into that as a scout and as a club that's bringing scouts together this time of year, or will very soon, with the general manager that is solely focused on having the best possible quarterback on his roster?
Okay, so we got a lot of ground to cover. One, I'm not a huge fan of mock drafts, other than the fact that they keep the draft conversation going throughout the year. So I love them for that. I don't love them because sometimes they set unrealistic expectations up for the players. Just got off the phone with a player today who was in a bunch of mock first-round drafts over the summer, and he's probably going to be a fourth-round draft pick. And he, that's tough for a player to hear. But to JJ, yes, the offense at Michigan is apples to apples. You're running a lot of pro concepts. It helps evaluators. There are offenses out there in college football that are really tough. And I'm not going to name schools because that's not in my best interest.
Okay.
But there are certainly some quarterbacks out there that you watch their college tape, and it makes for a really difficult evaluation. Now, sometimes that's a great selling point for the Senior Bowl because we can tell those guys to come down here and, show themselves a little bit. But really where we're at with football in general in college football, we're seeing all these guys look to the sideline and, they hold up a cue card of Barney Rubble and, whatever, some emoji for a play call. So, down here, they do get to huddle up. They do get to call cadence, all that stuff. But with JJ, going back to JJ McCarthy, we saw him cut it loose a little bit. That first throw of the night that we all thought was going to be an interception. And as a Michigan fan, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's starting like this. But he settled in. You saw the athlete. He moved around well. He ripped some throws. The kid's got a really live arm. So, and he made that critical throw late in the game to Roman Wilson, which I don't know how it maintained its spiral. Maybe it was such a tight ball coming off his hand that it still got tipped and maintained a spiral. Huge play in the game. And he needed to play well. That was, like he was a little up and down. He missed some throws over the course of the game, but when they needed him on that final drive, he stepped up. And again, I think everyone said he needed to play his best game for them to beat Bama. He didn't play his best game. He played good enough. I do think he's going to have to play his best game of the season to beat Washington.
And then there's Michael Penix Jr., Jim Nagy with us, executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. Penix Jr., speaking of spinning it, that guy lasered some throws last night. He's going to be 24 years old in May, and the injury history is there. How much do those two factors play a role in where he would stack up right now at the next level?
Yeah, those red flags are real. So the teams will address those. I don't think the age is that much of a big deal.
Okay.
I think when you read social media, a lot of the analytics people point to that a lot. I think football people have moved away from that age thing because, again, when you and I were growing up, like guys were done in their early 30s. Their NFL careers were over. I mean, you remember like Dan Fouts when he was like 31, 32, he could barely walk off a football field. These guys now, they take such good care of themselves. They're all playing into their, mid to late 30s, if they're good enough. I mean, I think the hope for most clubs is you get 2 contracts out of a player, regardless of position. If you can get a guy for 2 contracts, so that's, 8 or 9 seasons, that's an incredible draft pick if you can make that. So I don't think that's going to be a big deal. I think the injury stuff will. But again, I just go back to a guy like Brett Favre. That was my first job in the NFL back in 1996. So I, was in the building, heard a lot of things about when that trade came down with Brett Favre. It was a few years before I got there. But the medical people stepped in. They had failed Brett Favre on his physical coming out of Southern Miss. The Falcons took him in the first round. The Packers GM Ron Wolf wanted to make the trade for him year 2, and the Packers medical people tried to block the trade. And they're like, no, he's not going to stay healthy. Well, Ron Wolf pulled the power play. They trade for him. Ron Wolf ends up in the Hall of Fame because of the trade. And the rest is history. Brett Favre's the all-time Iron Man. So when it comes to the injury stuff, it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. I think the fact that Michael has made it through 2 college seasons now healthy, if you're in his corner, if you're selling him in a draft room, you just point to that. This guy's played like 27 straight games and he hasn't been hurt. So those are factors. But yeah, going back to the skill set, I first saw him 3 summers ago at the Manning camp, and as impressive as it is live, or it is, on TV, when you see this kid throw in person, like he's got a big time NFL arm. So that was a lot of fun watching him do his thing last night.
Jim, I have some questions about the future of college football as far as the bowl games go. You mentioned you didn't watch any. I watched a lot, and some of them were rather painful. The Georgia-Florida State one most recently, because maybe Florida State didn't care. I'm curious to see what you're hearing, what your opinion is, whatever that is. What are we looking at? Next year, we have a 12-team college football playoff. Are we going to see the end of bowls here sometime soon?
That is a great question, Kelly. I've seen a lot of radical ideas out there, and I'd be open to all of them if I were college football. I do think we're moving to a place. I think everyone agrees that college football needs its own governing body. You know, I mean, it just doesn't make sense that like women's gymnastics and men's tennis are governed by the same body that governs football, right? So I think we're heading in that direction, which will be good. I mean, again, what these games have basically become is a glorified spring ball. You know, you're almost getting a foreshadowing of the next season, which, you know, to me, I've seen maybe move them to the spring. That's interesting. I've heard about moving to week 0 and make the bowl games in week 0. So you get some really cool head-to-head matchups to start the year. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I haven't given it too much thought. I'm too concerned with putting our roster together. I do know that what's, you know, this isn't what we've grown up watching, right? Like I just remember growing up as a kid and laying around the living room with my family and watching big time bowl games with big time players that were going on in the NFL. It's hard when there's no star power in the bowl games, you know, and this is my 6th year at the Senior Bowl. And the first couple of years I used to watch the bowl games and sweat it out every week, you know, that our players would get through the game injury free. And that's kind of what I was doing last night in those 4 games. We probably had 25 guys playing in those 2 games last night. So you're just sitting there crossing your fingers. But even in the 6 years I've been in this role, our players have stopped playing in bowl games. So I don't have to sweat it out anymore. I mean, it's just, again, in such a short period of time, you're getting all these NFL players. They're just not playing in it. So something has to be done. I don't know what that answer is, but something needs to be done for sure.
Well, let's talk about that Senior Bowl. You guys actually added 3 Georgia players after that Florida State beatdown. That's great news. Who should we be keeping an eye on here when this game kicks off? I'm excited to kind of see what is going to be showcased here.
Well, I'm excited about this year's roster. It's going to be our most talented game ever. You know, at least since before the juniors could be in the draft or whatever that was 20 years ago. You know, if you were at the Senior Bowl, all these guys were the top guys. But the juniors have affected us over the years. But now that we can get juniors for the first time ever, and we just added a junior at Georgia today, we can't announce those guys for another a week from today. We'll have a special on the NFL Network where we talk about all the juniors. So it's exciting. You brought up Ladd McConkey. I mean, he's a fun one. Anyone that watches SEC football the last couple of years, he's a really fun player to watch. He's you know, sometimes I shy away from the player comparison thing, and you do the white receiver to white receiver thing. It seems a little lazy with Cooper Kupp, but he does have some Cooper Kupp to him. He really does. And I think what people don't get with Ladd is how fast he is. And he was banged up a lot this year, but you talk to the people at Georgia, he's going to be a high 4.3, low 4.4 guy. And he's and you saw it on that double pass the other day in the bowl game where they threw it to him and he was looking to throw and nothing was there. So he just took off. I mean, that showcased what Ladd is as an athlete. He's a really good playmaker. So that was a fun one. It's great having playmakers in the game. Like last year we had, you know, Tank Dell and Jaden Reed and Puka Nacua, all these guys that are blowing up in the NFL this year. I think Ladd could be that guy a year from now. We're sitting here 12 months from now, and Ladd's at the end of a really good rookie year in the NFL.
Jim Nagy's the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. Cam Ward is declaring for the NFL draft, but he's not hiring an agent. So he pulls out of the portal, going to the NFL draft. He's beginning workouts today. Can you contact him immediately? Like, I know that, but do you because of the junior aspect? And I'm curious. I mean, you just call the player directly?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we certainly can. And Cam's a senior, so he didn't have to declare or anything like that. We could have reached out to him, invited him, you know, a month ago or whatever. But that's what we're doing with the juniors. Yeah, we're waiting to see that public declaration on social media. And then once we see that kind of gives us an opportunity to reach out to the player. But we've been back channeling this stuff with the juniors for over a month now. And I was very open with the NFL. When they talked about this junior thing, I said, guys, there's no way for me to do this other than, you know, through the agent community. And that's been the nice thing about NIL is all these kids have agents already. So, you know, there is someone to contact regarding these players. And so we've been lining that up. It's like, okay, is this guy going to leave? Do you think he's going to come out? And if he does, do you want him to play in the Senior Bowl or not? And then we have those discussions. So it's been ongoing probably the last 4 or 5 weeks since the end of the season. But yeah, once they publicly declare, then usually I track down a number from an agent or a teammate. we hit them up that way.
Final 5 minutes or so here, Jim. Jim Nagy with us, Reese's Senior Bowl. Let's put the scout hat on. Let's go back to the NFL.
I never take it off, Jonathan.
I know.
I never take the scout hat off.
Maybe I don't know, from the pro personnel department you may. I don't know. We'll see. I know you watch a lot of it, a ton of it. Which teams right now are playing their best going into Week 18 and into the playoffs? And, I mean, teams that were playing great half of the year, 3/4 of the year, slipping up a bit right now. How much does that, to you, really matter if the teams that we saw play so well are not necessarily doing it right now, even though they're going to be in the postseason?
I think it matters a lot. Going back to my time in New England, Coach Belichick always stressed, playing your best ball after Thanksgiving and really the build after Thanksgiving. This is the time you want to be peaking. I do think there's something to that. And when you look at what's going on in the league, I don't get to watch a lot of NFL tape anymore, but I do talk to a lot of friends around the league. And then, we'll have conversations based off, who they've played or who they're getting ready to play and who they've watched and really studied. And the Baltimore Ravens right now, to me, look like the class of the NFL. They are embarrassing people, whether it's San Francisco, Miami. I mean, they've taken on some really good teams lately and just embarrassed them. And you don't handle teams in the NFL. They're putting up college type scores right now. And we just don't see that, right? So I think they're kind of the class of it right now. I think San Francisco in the NFC is probably the team. And then the Detroit Lions, that's a team built off emotion and toughness and grit. We all know that. That's what Dan Campbell has really put a stamp on this football team. And coming off that, what happened in Dallas the other night, I think you're going to have a really pissed off football team, for lack of a better phrase. You're going to have a pissed off team, heading into the playoffs. They're going to have something to prove. They feel like they've been wronged. So to me, that's a dangerous team. They got nothing to lose. They really don't. I mean, it's a franchise that's won one playoff game since 1957. So they're gonna get in and let it rip. So I think those are the three teams right now that kind of, to me, stand head and shoulders. But that what Baltimore's doing, going back to Baltimore, they're when the quarterback, when Lamar plays the way he played, lights out the other day, nobody can beat that team.
Jim, as much as I'd love Baltimore to win the Super Bowl, I am a big fan of underdogs. So I'm not going to let you off the hook giving me the 3 chalk as a Super Bowl winner. Give me somebody deep, like somebody sitting on the verge of the point. Like, give me like the Pittsburgh Steelers, how rejuvenated they are with Mason Rudolph. Somebody like that you think maybe can win a playoff game or two, maybe not a Super Bowl, but someone to look out for a team to look out for over the next couple of weeks.
Well, Kelly, I watched the Steelers Seahawks the other day because the Hawks were the last team I worked for. So that's kind of when I watched the NFL, that's my team. And they line up they ran the ball 46 times the other day against the Seahawks and just ran it down their throat on the road. I mean, that was a must win for Seattle. They had to win that game at home. And I mean, no offense to Mason Rudolph, he's a Senior Bowl alum, love you, Mason, but like you would think that would be a game that Seattle could go get. So I don't know. I mean, you kind of laid it out. You kind of set it up for me there with Pittsburgh. I mean, that's a good one. I mean, Mike Tomlin, I saw the graphic that they put on the TV the other day of the most seasons without, most winning seasons or non-losing seasons in a row. And it was like George Halas, Bill Belichick, Don Shula, and Mike Tomlin. It was insane. Maybe it was Bill Walsh, but so you never count them out. And then I'm just trying to think of a team in the NFC if they get in. I think if Tampa. I think Tampa, we saw Baker get hot in Green Bay a couple weeks ago. They've got enough playmakers that maybe Tampa could do something if they squeeze in. But I don't know, whoever comes out of that NFC South is going to be the underdog. So I think if Tampa gets in, Baker's a guy. Like on any given Sunday, Baker's a guy that can get it done.
And how about the Cleveland Browns and what Joe Flacco's been doing? And you've been behind the scenes. Losing and then playing 4 different quarterbacks in a season, and for the Browns to have 11 wins right now is nuts to me, Jim. And I would throw them into the mix as well.
I would too. And I lived there for almost 5 years when I worked for the Patriots. I lived in Cleveland. My sister still lives there. So I'm attached to some Browns folks. And I brought up the Lions playoff drought. I mean, the Browns are kind of a long-suffering fan base too. Give it to Andrew Berry, their GM. I mean, you've seen a lot of teams right now stumble around trying to navigate the backup quarterback thing. and bringing in Joe Flacco, man, that was a great answer for them. To me, the blueprint, bringing a guy that's been there, done that. And I'll say this, another team, another GM that isn't getting credit right now is Chris Ballard in Indy. Look what Gardner Minshew's been able to do. Here we are going into week 17 or week 18, whatever, I guess week 18 now, 17th game. And they've got the Colts on the verge of a playoff berth. I mean, they lose the guy they invest the number 4 overall pick in. They bring in Gardner, not much fanfare. No one really talks about it. And here we are, they're 9-7. They're getting ready to win 10 games in Indy. So hats off to Andrew Berry, hats off to Chris Ballard for finding a solution at that spot.
No doubt. Indy, they need a win and a Jacksonville loss. They get in. They would have their 10th win. Indy faces Houston, Jacksonville facing Tennessee. Jim Nagy joins us weekly. Always great to catch up and scout college football and more. Jim, get some rest, man. Busy stretch coming up, and
no time to rest.
Hey, the sprint
right
is
now.
here as you get all the commitments and what's going to be a solid matchup. And I've said this for a long time, but Kelly. This game, the Senior Bowl, is to me better than the Combine. Pads on, you're actually practicing all week. You get to move guys around to different positions. It's excellent, and it sets up for what's going to be a stacked top 100 in the upcoming NFL draft in April. Jim, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Jim Nagy there from the Reese's Senior Bowl. So right now, if you want some OutKick gear, you can head over to the OutKick store. It's officially live, outkick.com. And you can stock up on all the golf polos, T-shirts, hats, and more. That's shop.outkick.com. It is time for some NFL overreaction. Davey Hudson jumps into the mix now as we close out with some interesting topics and discussion, realistic or overreaction from the National Football League going into Week 18. What's up, Davey?
What's up, guys? Like you mentioned it earlier, Week 18, everything coming down the stretch, and it's win or go home time for a lot of these teams. So we'll start with one team that I think a lot of people are riding the hot hand right now, but Buffalo will win the AFC East.
So I went back and forth on this matchup, knowing what we saw in Baltimore and knowing what we've seen from Buffalo in recent weeks. The fact that this game for Miami is on the road, that factors in to what I'm playing into this. I'm taking Buffalo. I think Buffalo wins it, and I think they're better suited, Kelly. This sounds strange. I think Buffalo is built to win on the road. I'm not sure that when it comes down to some of the worst weather that Miami could face, that's the best for their offense in what has been a defensive-minded league right now. And we saw what happened this past week. We've seen what happened to Miami in previous matchups against quality opponents. And while they beat Dallas, I'm still looking around going, who is Miami and where do they fit? Are they on the top shelf or are they the shelf below? I'm looking at Buffalo in the same way. They're not top shelf, but they're playing top shelf football right now.
One of our guests earlier, John, said this. Dolphins are banged up, right? Tua got hurt against the Ravens. We knew that Tyreek Hill has been limited. We understand that Jalen Waddle is still questionable to return.
Yeah, you're right.
Raheem Mostert, he got hurt. Something happened to his knee there in the Ravens game. There's a lot of question marks in this game. It makes me really apprehensive as the person holding the Dolphins to win the AFC East ticket. But Josh Allen, he has not done anything. You got Josh Allen, who kind of got a little banged up against the Patriots, but he's only averaged 166 passing yards over the last 3 games. How is he going to go into Miami and out-throw Tua and this offense? I think there is a massive overreaction to what we saw last week in Baltimore. I think Baltimore is head and shoulders better than both of these teams.
Yes.
I like Miami to not, as I mentioned earlier, I made a mistake and hedged my college football pool. I am not hedging my AFC East ticket.
Yeah, and this isn't really a situation where it's like, oh, if you lose Buffalo, you're likely going to be a wild card spot. It's either they pretty much get the second overall seed in the AFC or they're going home. So tons of stuff riding on line. Speaking of win or go home, Tampa Bay will miss the playoffs by losing to Carolina this weekend.
That's an overreaction. Tampa Bay is winning. Baker Mayfield, while he tripped, didn't win, and he hasn't played well he's been perfect in weeks prior. And this is the Carolina Panthers. the Carolina Panthers have an owner that's throwing drinks at fans. I mean, Carolina has one more game, and it's on to locker cleanout day, and they should go. I mean, they've had the locker cleaned out for weeks now. Tampa wins this game, Kelly.
Yeah, there's a lot of injury, though, on the defensive side of the ball. Shaquille Barrett is still questionable, and that makes me nervous. Obviously, we're talking about this on a Tuesday. Is he going to play? Of course he's going to play. Is he going to be 100%? Something to think about there. I love taking 5.5-point underdogs in the NFL, particularly at home. I might end up on the Panthers here, but I would have to say I do think the Bucs will win this game. But yeah, keep an eye on kind of what happened last weekend. Your owner gets in a little bit of trouble. Sometimes those distractions can affect a team, at least from a locker room perspective. So keep an eye there on if anything actually happens in the next 6 days regarding that.
And Tepper's also, after the Titans game here in Nashville, he's screaming coming out of the locker room, fires Frank Reich the next day. Offensive coordinator had already been fired. Like, it's not a great scene in Carolina. This is a bit different from Todd Bowles' perspective behind the scenes.
And the draft right now, thanks to Carolina, runs through Chicago. A lot of difficult decisions that organization is going to have to make over the course of this offseason, but Chicago should fire Matt Eberflus.
So this is not an overreaction to me, but I have a caveat. I've got a very short list of coaches that would determine the answer to this and the path and the plan that they have been on over the last 3 years. They went through salary cap hell for 2 years. They had the most money last year, didn't bring in the right players. Some of the players they did was via trade with Moore. He has synced up well with Justin Fields. I like Justin Fields. I think if you invest around him, he can be a winning quarterback. He's on a bad roster right now. He doesn't have the help around him. I want to know what that plan was about, but also, I mean, where's Jim Harbaugh going? If you know he's going to the Chargers, then if you're going big or going home, then you stay at home with Eberflus and you run it back another year, given the plan and you're backing the options that you're going to have in the offseason and the fact you have 2 first-round picks. That would be my answer. I think it's an overreaction right now that he's going to be fired, but it's because I believe they get the idea that Harbaugh is going elsewhere.
They have an opportunity to win 8 games. What is wrong with Chicago fans? This is what they do. They run there with torches. They want people fired. They want to draft a new quarterback. If it's not a coaching carousel, it's a quarterback carousel. This man went 3-14 the year before. Matt Nagy, 6-11, 8-8, 8-8. 12-4 when they lost in the playoffs. That was a painful one with a missed field goal. Prior to that, John Fox, 5-11. 3-13, 6-10, 5-11, 8-8 with Mark Trestman. I mean, what are we doing here? If this man wins 8 games, you keep Justin Fields, you keep him, you get your draft picks. Hey, maybe let's draft a nice left tackle for Justin Fields so that he has a little bit more time. Maybe we get him another weapon or 2 or another defensive player. Whatever it is, you've got at some point to start building. You cannot start building your Lego house and then rip it down as soon as you get 3 Lego layers in, because you're never going to get to the top. I do not understand this at all. No, this is ridiculous. Chicago fans, you should get loud and say, we got to give this guy at least 1 more year and keep Justin Fields.
Well, just make sure that you're going to pay Justin Fields if you decide to do that. He's eligible for it. And I would also say, let's make sure we get the offensive coordinator right. Fields is apparently really good, and he's in with, and he's friendly, and like they hang out in the off season with Geddes. But I'm thinking there's more to it than what we can perceive it to be with Fields. And the number 1 pick is massive. What do they want, and how much do they love the top quarterbacks?
Well, with that being said, Hut, Caleb Williams will not be the number 1 overall pick.
This is overreaction. I see. Kelly, I view this as very cyclical. All of the hype about Caleb Williams, it was close to, but it wasn't the same as Trevor Lawrence, where it's just perceived to be, we know, the number 1 overall pick. Preseason, he's saying he doesn't want to play for certain teams. He may consider coming back. Everyone thought that was Arizona. Who knows? He's liking tweets that have him not going to Chicago. I'm here to say that it's cyclical. There's going to be a lot of criticism with Caleb Williams. There's a team that will trade up and draft him because no one in the media is going to start chirping about Caleb Williams the way they did and definitively say he's number one overall if they're not hearing it from multiple people across the league.
You know, our guest earlier, John said, hey, guess what? None of this stuff matters. How they played in college doesn't matter. It only matters how fast they can run in the tights and underwear at the combine. I am going to keep the Caleb Williams slander to a minimum until I see how well he does in the combine. What I saw from him in college, not that impressed. Granted, he probably needed to play with a better defense, but not only his lack of leadership skills, his lack of maturity, and then all of a sudden coming in here with demands, wanting shareholder type ownership of an NFL team. I think we need to pump the brakes, but I am curious to see how well he does in the combine. Right now, he's minus $5, is a $5 favorite to be the first player drafted in this year's NFL draft.
Yeah, you had Peyton Manning, who Bud Adams with the Titans wanted to give him part ownership. He couldn't do it against the rules. Caleb Williams can't do it, even if he wanted to. Same for Aaron Rodgers in New York. Kelly, thank you so much for filling in, sitting in the co-host chair. It's been great.
It's been a wonderful time. Thank you guys for having me, and I will fill in for either you or Chad at any point in time.
Back at it for the Wednesday edition tomorrow, 4 o'clock Eastern, our start time. For Hot Mike with Hutton Withrow across the OutKick Network.